pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That's the first time that screwed me up when it comes to the 6 different sounds. That's why I try to look away. Oh, well. Okay. Evan, welcome back. We're going to go with a slightly different format this evening. Each of the selectmen have written individual questions, which may be catered to individual candidates to try to further specify, concerns or thoughts we have about particular candidates. I actually wound up writing 3 questions that I'm going to apply to all 3 candidates. There's reasons behind each of them, what I'm looking for, and I do want to see how everyone answers these same questions. So I did go with 3 that I'm going to use for everybody. But I don't know if anybody would like to go first for a question.
I'll go first.
Okay, Dylan will go first. Go ahead, Dylan.
Sure. Good evening, Mr. Kenny. Nice to see you again.
You too. Thank you.
So everyone at home knows you've worked for the towns of Amesbury and the city of Amesbury and the town of Wakefield. Can you tell us a little bit about the size of the budgets of these municipalities and what corresponding insights that might bring to our much smaller town budget here in Barre?
Yeah, so I was full-time for Amesbury. I've been elected to the school committee in Wakefield and appointed to the finance committee in Wakefield. So I've only been working, so to speak, for at least getting paid to work. We still work in these volunteer positions, as you folks know. But Wakefield's about 28,000 people. Amesbury, 17,000 people. The experience you learn, I was talking to somebody few years ago, who's a mentor of mine. I remember him saying this to me. He said, Evan, it doesn't matter if you're chief of staff to the mayor of Amesbury or the chief of staff to the mayor of Boston. All these skills are scalable, right? Municipal government, well, every town, and we've talked about this, well, every town is different. And I sort of jokingly said to you folks the other day that, Amesbury's not on another planet. It's a lot like Barre in a lot of ways. Towns, as much as they can be different, they're so similar because of how much we operate within a state mandated structure. The planning board, for example, is elected. It doesn't matter what town you go to, and they operate independently. And it's not like in Amesbury where we had what we call a strong mayor form of government. It didn't mean we got to rule without checks, right? We had department heads working for us in a little bit more of a formal way. But some of our biggest initiatives were economic development initiatives, right? Where we don't get to pick who's on the planning board. We don't get to, we appointed the ZBA, but they still operated independently under state statute. And these were some of the most important boards for us to get through to get some of these big projects done that were transforming the town in terms of tax base and tourism, but without sacrificing the character of the town. And I know that's a concern in Barre, where residents, you folks are looking for growth, but residents want to do it in a way that it doesn't alter the character of the community. We had to do it, and we did it successfully in Amesbury, and we did it with the same obstacles that you folks have to face in a little bit more of a decentralized form of government that you have in Barre. Wakefield, forgive me if I'm droning on here, but Wakefield is even more similar to Barre in that we have an open town meeting form of government. And it's more decentralized than you'd think. We have, for example, we have a municipal gas and light department, and you have your water department, water sewer, and they all have their own commissions that are elected that govern those individual sections of government. So even here, where we consider ourselves a strong town administrator form of government, the town administrator doesn't really have a lot of people formally working for him, and that's sort of, we talked about this in Barre, where the town administrator, at least on the org chart, may not have a lot of people directly reporting to them, but at the same time, the town administrator is a leader who has to glue everything together. And so it's a delicate balance that I love to weave my way through. And so I think it served me very, very well to understand a town like Barre, working with my, what is relatively extensive experience in municipal government, across the state.
Thank you.
Matt?
I have a question that was similar to Dylan's, but I'll focus in more specifically on what I might view as a different type of challenge with the size of our town and the size of our budget. A lot of times, especially when working towards grants or other funding that may be coming from the state, a lot of per capita things become relevant as to where they want to spend their money or where they want to grant their money. And so from my question, or I'll just read it out and let you know that that's kind of where I'm focusing my thoughts. Please explain the differences in how you would approach the administration of a small town versus Amesbury, specifically in regards to less support staff, smaller budget, and reduced population in relation to procuring assistance from state and federal agencies.
Per capita, I understand how that might be a disadvantage for Barre and when competing with maybe some larger towns. That's not always, though, part of the grants that we got in Amesbury weren't about per capita. There were actually, a lot of more economic development grants. We did about 5 or 6 million in MassWorks grants, if you're familiar with those. And those are infrastructure grants that are intended to facilitate and sort of supplement shovel-ready projects that we've already done the legwork for. To get them ready to go and in the ground. It's like I said, I think Amesbury, it doesn't matter what municipality you're working in to some degree. If you build relationships, we beat out a lot of bigger towns, sort of counter to the rationale you're sort of laying out, Matt. We beat out a lot of bigger towns because, frankly, we built good relationships in the governor's office, in the state house, and we did the work and I mean the hands-on work that you're asking the town administrator of Barre to do. We did the hands-on work to get down and understand the details of the projects we were looking at, because if they're a priority, you have to go as low as you need to, so to speak, to understand and be able to answer the questions that matter. So you ask about sort of how would I deal with reduced support staff? I've been down much further than most CEOs or COOs tend to go. When you need to get something done, you need to get into it, and I know you need that on a day-to-day basis from the town administrator of Barre. And I think especially I think if you talk to my former boss, who's one of my references, he'll attest to that. I was extremely detail oriented, and when something caught our attention, when something rose up to our level of sort of importance, if you will, we dug down as far as we needed to, and so I don't think. And again, I've said this. This wasn't a job where I got to just point at people and say, do this, and delegate. No effective leader can really do that. You have to be able to sort of trust your staff, but also verify. And whether they formally report to you on the org chart or not, that I think principle still applies. You have to know who you're dealing with, and you have to understand what you can trust them with, what they need help on, and where you might need to look a little bit more closely. And in order to do that effectively, you have to understand the intricacies of the work that they're doing. And I think, frankly, I thrive in that environment.
Thank you.
I'm trying to look for questions that are going to tax people's working knowledge of the structure, and that's the goals of my question. So my first question is about getting work done for the town. I'd like to know how you would proceed for, say, getting a small project done for the town that's maybe a $3,000 value, and how you would also proceed looking at a larger project of, say, $30,000 value. What process do you need to go through for both of those jobs? And just try to see if you're going to dot the I's and cross the T's and understand the process.
Well, I think the principles are the same almost no matter the dollar number. Whether it's a $3,000 project, a $30,000 project, or a $3 million project, you have to plan. You have to understand what the goals are, and then you have to prepare and understand what you need to execute. And then you have to execute. And as I said before, I've learned in municipal government, oftentimes there are there's an abundance of planners, and sometimes not enough doers. And I sort of pride myself on being a doer. I can plan as well, but really the meat and potatoes isn't the plan. It's really what you get done, and whether you're executing to the plan. So you need to make sure you assemble the right team if a team is necessary. If we're talking about a $3,000 project or sometimes a $30,000 project, you may not need a big team. That's something that I've frankly managed much larger projects, and I oftentimes I took it into my own hands. When it was appropriate. And because department heads, by the way, are swamped too. This is a work-intensive environment, municipal government, because everybody's understaffed, and oftentimes everybody's underfunded to some degree. And so you need to have somebody who's willing to put in the work to get the job done. But ultimately it starts with the vision, it starts with the goals. Why are you spending the money? What are you spending it on? Understand your budget, craft one intelligently and thoughtfully, and from almost a data-based perspective, and then manage it through from there. Or as we say, as the case may often be in Barre, you don't get to just manage it. You have to actually do it step by step. And I've done everything from the lowest, simplest project to the highest, most complex economic development project, for example, where we had a $20 million hotel involving local government, state government, and federal government, and all of the hoops and the obstacles that come with that wonderful trifecta of government forces. And so you have to go, as I said to Dylan, you have to dig down as far as you need to understand the things you need to understand to get the project done, and that's where keeping your eyes on the goal really matters and pays off.
Thank you. Dylan, you're up for your next question, please.
Okay, Mr. Kenny, I know you're not a historian, but have you looked into the effects of the 2008-2009 recession when it came to municipalities and state aid? Have we learned the proper lesson from 12 years ago? Are we approaching the current downturn appropriately? What do you think?
I think you go back further than 2008 and you look at state aid trends, I'm sure to a community like Barre, to most communities in Massachusetts, and it's either a flat line or it's slightly declining usually. And meanwhile, costs are still going up. And in some cases, especially in recession-type economic conditions, the community's ability to pay is lessening. And if you look at a pie chart from say 2000 between how much of the municipality's operation, including the school department, was funded by state aid and how much was local, and then you looked at that pie chart today, the amount that's funded by local property taxpayers is immensely larger, stunningly larger, and it's a trend that frankly I've been fighting now for almost 8 years, beginning when I first was on the school committee with Chapter 78. The state loves, and forgive me for being a little candid here, but the state loves, and the feds love, to shove down onto communities like Barre and Amesbury and Wakefield these mandates. They tell you have to do stuff. They tell you have to hire people to do it. They tell you have to make to buy stuff to do it, and then they don't want to pay you to do it. They don't want to pay for it, but they want you to do it, and it's a disturbing trend. The recession was even worse. There was, very few communities who managed through that without reducing staff or programs or services. And if they did, if the communities that did survive without doing that probably needed an override, which is probably exactly the opposite of what residents needed at that time. So it's a tough trend to look at, but I think it actually goes a little bit beyond recessions. Recessions hurt worse and they're sharper at the time. But if you look at the macro trend, it's really ugly, and it goes beyond economic conditions. It's sort of every year they're chipping away, and making property taxpayers fund more while the state or the feds fund less. And again, I've been banging that drum for as long as I've been in municipal government. So I hope I answered your question, Dylan.
Thank you.
Matt, your second question, please.
Okay. This whole different kind of genre of a question here, Evan. If I recall correctly, you're currently residing inside of 95?
Yes.
Or right there in Wakefield?
Yep.
Okay. Do you plan to relocate closer to Barre if you get the job?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I remember this coming up in the interim interview. I remember Dylan making a comment about my 75-minute commute, which I then regretted highlighting. But I do. I fully intend to. It's just frankly not feasible for me to stay here and commute to Barre and be able to put in the extra hours that I always like to put in as an employee of a municipality. So I fully intend to relocate out there. And like I said before, I really like that area of the state. Greg, I also like to play golf, so I know you guys have plenty of golf courses out in that area. So it's sort of set up for me in my lifestyle anyway. But the simple answer to your question is yes, I absolutely do.
All right. A quick little follow-up was just, and this isn't going to hold you to it because I know there's a lot of variables you can't really be helped. I wouldn't hold you to it. But how long do you think it would take for you to get closer, per se?
Oh, I have to imagine, the rental market's a little strange up in that area, but I have to imagine it would be a matter of a few months. And there are a lot of variables, but, as, to Dylan's point, I don't know how long I can tolerate a 75-minute commute. So I absolutely would be fully committed to getting out there as quickly as I could.
All right. Thank you very much.
Well, Evan, my second question is a little more creative. We have some marijuana grows in our town, and we're hopeful that we may have a retail sale at some day. The retail sale, I think, conservatively should bring us upwards of $300,000 in excess revenues. Could you tell me 3 ways to handle that excess revenue? 3 different ways, and what you would recommend, which may be a combination of those, or what you would recommend doing with that volume of money?
Well, it's general fund revenue. Generally, you can put into your host community agreements, which you're familiar with if you have 2 grow facilities, some degree of specificity with respect to how the revenue is spent. I actually tend to shy away generally from earmarking revenue before we have it, because every year some surprise comes up, in this case like a global pandemic, where money that you might have planned to spend one place needs to be spent in a more core function. And so it really fits more, Mr. Chairman, into a strategy of growth, general growth, than it does about funding specific things. If you folks had a specific district improvement you wanted to do, there's probably a way that we could take some of that revenue through a what's called a district improvement financing scheme, where you do basically essentially earmark the portion of growth from what that property was before it's built out to what it's valued at when it's built out, and you take that differential and you can earmark it over a certain amount of time for a specific cause. We did that in Amesbury, one for roads and another one for soccer fields and parks. But that needs to be for a very specific, sorely needed need. Excuse my redundancy. I shy away from committing to it. If you guys had a specific idea that you really wanted to fund, and you saw this revenue as a great opportunity to do it, all the better. But ultimately, money's fungible, right? And revenue coming in is good, and new revenue coming in is even better. So I look at it more through a little bit of a larger lens as overall growth year to year, and how that kind of commercial growth, which is really what it is, can help ease the tax burden on your residents, really your homeowners. So I look at it through that lens. But if you folks had ideas on how to specifically earmark it, I would be all ears.
Thank you. Dylan, back to you you have a third question, I assume. I didn't ask you guys how many you had. I did 3.
I have a third question.
Excellent.
So this is about the residents of Barre. In this time of recession, COVID-19, etc., our neighbors and our residents, the families of town, are struggling. Some are struggling more than ever with interrupted work opportunities and downturns, lots of layoffs, and everything else. Do you have any ideas in terms of supporting affordable housing, food security initiatives, or any other avenues to address rural poverty?
Well, I think that, I've said this to you folks before. It is in times like these, especially, where you're focused on the reality. You're spending taxpayer dollars that are taken for people who could be struggling, as you say, more than ever, Dylan. It's very important to keep those lenses on in a time like this. Affordable housing. So we met our quota in Amesbury. That was they have the 10% quota, where if you're under 10% affordable housing units, a 40B developer can come in and kind of skirt and cut a lot of corners to get their project through that a regularly permitted project wouldn't be able to get away with. So we were sort of proud to meet that 10%. We did it through a statute. Instead of 40B, we used a statute called 40R, where you zone an area that's called a smart growth area, and you get essentially grant money from the state for doing that. I think we did a 200 plus unit 40R that was going to be a 40B. It all counts towards your affordable housing quota, but we got, I think, $3,000 per unit. I think it might have been 240 units. And then we got another like $300,000 from the state when we did the zoning. So it was like a total of $1 million in very flexible money from the state. And we had a little bit more control over the project when it went through, as opposed to a 40B. So that's a good alternative. I also have major concerns, and you folks see this probably more so than I even did in Wakefield or Amesbury. What we call affordable housing in the state isn't so affordable. Oftentimes it's based on Boston rates, which is night and day compared to a community like Barre. And so the goal of affordable housing really should be to make housing affordable. And oftentimes the market does that better than the government programs do. So you can also use a system like CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, to fund the rehabilitation of existing lower income and lower rent housing units, so that it's one thing to say we have 10% affordable housing units according to the state standards. It's another thing to say our residents can afford to live here, right? Because they really are two different things. When you look at the government definition and you look at the reality of what it means to have affordable housing. And so this might be an unpopular opinion, but I'm more focused on having housing rates that generally respond to market demands, having housing rates that people can afford. Not so much, pounding my chest and saying we have affordable housing when people still can't afford to live there. So I think we need to focus more on facilitating the market through CDBG rehabilitation funds. And when it comes to food service, I've seen incredible work done by food pantries in churches, and tear-inducing kind of work. And the will of people always amazes me in these trying times, and the charity of people always amazes me in these trying times. So there are ways to get them some additional money if a charitable organization like that is struggling in your region. There are grants for that, and sometimes it's worth the investment for taxpayers. You need to do that very carefully. But when your community is struggling, if it's not our job to prop them up on some level, I'm not sure why we do the work we do. So I hope I answered your question.
All right, Matt, we'll take your third question. We are down to 3 minutes on our allotted time, but we should have 5 in between candidates. So we'll hopefully get through these last 2 questions.
Quick question here. Your experience brought you to the finalist table, Evan. What are you doing or plan to do in the near future that expands your educational basis? Or is it something right now that's on your horizon?
Oh, it's very much on my radar. I actually went back for a little while I was in Amesbury. I was working too darn hard to be able to do it. But it's very much on my radar. I've had people telling me, people who care about me very much. I was hired at 19 in Amesbury, and I was a sophomore in college. I got hired. I left my fall semester for winter break, got hired, and didn't come back my spring semester. When I left my fall semester, I fully intended to go back in the spring. It is a tough thing, as maybe you folks know, to work full time and a half or double, as I'd like to do in municipal government, and go to school. But I'm fully committed to doing it. It's very clear that it's highly valued, especially in government roles. And so it's something that I'd always expected to finish. The dilemma I'm in now is a simple one, and it's that I think I need a job in order to pay for the education. So I'm in a little bit of a catch-22 here. But certainly if it's something that's important to you folks, and you have a time frame that you want to apply, even as a condition of my employment, I'd be happy to discuss that, and I'd be happy to commit to it. So if it's part of the job, it's part of the job.
All right, thank you.
All right, your last question will be a doozy. Looking at personnel management. Let's say you have one of our town employees comes to you and complains that their department head is at work and they appear to be under the influence. How do you handle that?
Department head. I don't know how much of a detailed answer you're looking for here, but my first reaction would be to thank the employee for stepping up. You have to reward people in your organization. Don't underestimate, and I'm sure you don't, but don't underestimate the risk that a lower level employee is taking by whistleblowing and going to the next level on their boss. When you go around your boss in the private sector or the public sector, you better be right usually, because they can have consequences. Generally, you're not supposed to violate the org chart, and however, that kind of behavior, you have to reward that kind of whistleblowing, because it's a core value of the organization that you should uphold. I would start by thanking the person. I would say, stay right here. Frankly, I'd probably ask if they were okay, because sometimes that can be traumatic for folks. And my next move would probably be to talk to that department head about a topic unrelated. I would conceal the identity of the employee who came to me. Maybe I'd go see that employee, the department head, if the pandemic allows, and sort of get a sense for it on my own. And then, frankly, as I often do, and as I encourage everybody to do when they're in sort of complex legal times, I would probably pick up the phone and talk to a trusted labor attorney for 5 minutes and say, how do I proceed with this? I think he's under the influence, and my instinct would be to send them home. But especially in government, or if they're a union employee, you have to do everything correctly. If you make one wrong step along the way, oftentimes the right decision that you made in the end is unraveled by a grievance process or arbitration or whatever. So oftentimes it's worth the money to spend on the 5-minute call or 10-minute call with the lawyer to make sure you get everything right. So the decision that you make, to me, that's a terminable offense. And I would want to make sure that that employee who we terminate doesn't get a chance to come back in because of some legal screw up I made, frankly. And so that's probably the route I would go down. And I would be notifying you folks. I would say, because ultimately you folks make the decision in Barre, and I think everybody needs to be involved. But it's crucial that you consult with a legal team and make sure that you're taking the right steps. Because oftentimes, it could be a matter of they need psychological help, and so you have to deal with these issues very delicately, but you also can't have it in the workplace. It's like zero tolerance. So I think I answered your question, Mr. Chairman.
You did. Thank you very much. This evening, I'm not going to give you an opportunity to ask us any questions. We are pressed for time. But thank you for joining us again tonight. We will probably have some debate after this, but I don't think we'll make a decision until our meeting on Monday, so we can all process it and put some time aside to discuss it. We may do some tonight, but within a week, I would think we'll have a decision and be letting people know.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the time frame, and it's good to talk with you folks again.
Thank you for coming again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bob, you still there someplace?
Yes, Sean, Mr. O'Brien has just entered, so whenever you're ready, I will let him in.
You guys need a short minute? You want to go right into the next one?
Let's go straight ahead and keep this moving.
I'd like to as well. So, okay, let's bring him in, please, Bob.
Okay, he should be here.
Hey. Good evening, Sean.
Evening. How are you?
Good. I slipped a little bit on our first one. I didn't go on a normal spiel, but the same rules apply as before. We're obviously being live broadcast on YouTube, and this will be a rebroadcast again. You have the Selectman here and a couple of viewers for this evening.
Perfect.
Our format's a little different. We've all developed separate questions. We may ask different questions of each candidate. I plan to ask the same three for my own reasoning in it. And we've all developed our questions to research what it is we are trying to discover about each particular candidate. That being said, we're going to start with Dylan this evening, and he'll ask you a question. We should have a total of 9 questions, hopefully in 30 minutes.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, good evening, Sean. Nice to see you again. So for those unfamiliar with your resume, your work has largely centered around municipal finance and budgets in the towns of Concord and Natick, which are much larger communities with much larger budgets than we have in Barre. Could you tell us what you learned from those experiences in those environments and how you would scale down and use those lessons here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The good thing is the rules don't change when the town size changes. So a lot of municipal finance, applies across the board. So a lot of the principles that I learned in Concord to start my career was centered around GFOA's guidelines, which is Government Finance Officers Association, which helped kind of build that framework where there are certain core values that apply to any city or town, no matter the size of it. Because a lot of the metrics that you would look for in municipal finance are either, things like percentage of debt service to operating revenues, things that it doesn't matter if it's $100 or $100 million. There's certain thresholds that you'd want to hold true. So some of those core values that I bring over in terms of finance would be having confidence in your cost structures through budget, CBAs, making sure personnel accounts tie out at the end of the year and that you operate within those budgets. So no matter what the scale is, being able to follow those guidelines, like monthly budget reports to actual expense. I don't want to put everyone to sleep talking about municipal finance, but basically carrying those key practices forward to each department and the overall management structure, which I think is universal, even though it's a different size in terms of where I'm coming from in terms of budget size.
Quick follow-up.
Sure.
Do you foresee challenges scaling down?
I think the biggest challenges would be to really get a sense of the market and what the services cost to provide. I think that's sort of It's almost like anything. It's you adjust to the market and make decisions based on that. I think it's still Barry still provides a lot of the services that I'm familiar with working with Natick and Concord. So I think some of the challenges is probably going to be wanting to do more than than I've experienced in the past. But I think that is also a positive because you can take some of those ideas that you learned, and not everything's decided by the dollar too. There's efficiencies that can be achieved through other means in terms of no matter what the scale is.
Great, thank you.
Matt, you're up, and don't forget your mic. Just in case. You've been good so far tonight.
Exactly. Mr. O'Brien, what are your experiences and or education in human resources and personnel policies?
So, in addition to working in municipal finance, I also have some experience in the administrative and operations side. I would not say I am a HR director by any means, but I understand some of the core principles in terms of collective bargaining procedures, as I've been on the management team for some of those negotiations in the past with a few units. So I understand that piece of it. I also, on the hiring, recruiting, and retaining piece, also think that there's some innovative ways to attract and retain high-quality employees that some traditional routes may not lend to as well. I think, especially in the Worcester area, I went to Assumption, and there's plenty of great talent to be tapped into, whether it be through internships or starting out careers in municipal government. That's really not promoted enough from my standpoint. So basically being innovative and being able to maximize those outlets that I'm familiar with to bring in and retain high quality individuals, and also the bargaining piece. On some of the administrative pieces, was there sort of a key point that you're looking for in this position in terms of the personnel management, or were those sort of the core areas that?
It was along that lines, kind of similar to, also for anybody that may have worked with you, underneath you, whether you're direct supervisor or indirect because they work for a supervisor in between you and them. Have you had to deal with any personnel issues where you actually had to check the policy and make sure that things are right? And okay, did somebody do something that does or doesn't need attention from their department head per se?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely something that comes up. I think there's sort of two pieces to that. If it's a discipline issue, a lot of those are pursuant to I'm assuming if it was a union position, it'd be pursuant to the grievance procedure written out in the collective bargaining agreement. So I think a lot of our boilerplate contracts have the grievance procedure basically going through the frontline manager, department head, town administrator, and then if it can't be resolved through that, however the contract lays out, whether it's mediation or arbitration through the union steward and the arbiter. Now, one thing on the non-union side, biggest thing I have is building consensus between people, because I work with a lot of highly skilled, division managers and department heads, and there's the personalities in there that they want their priority, especially through the budget process, acknowledged or funded going forward. So I think building those relationships is one of the best skills I have, especially when you run into tensions between funding for schools versus funding for town departments, and that's sort of like the tension points that we have. But in terms of like personnel interactions, for the most part, have been really positive. So not too many issues that I can think of.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Sean, my first question, all my questions are really to look at procedural issues, working knowledge of the job of the office. So my first question has to do with trying to get projects or work done on behalf of the town. So I'd like to know what you see the process as to get a small project done, say of a $3,000 value, and also the process for a larger project, say of $30,000 value.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing you have to do is get the right people involved and build out a working plan to get it done. I think one of the first things, I'll give you kind of a couple examples of projects I've done in the past. One on the facility side, and then another on a software system update. So one of them, when I was working in Concord, was we were doing a renovation of our first floor in Town Hall, which, as we know, with procurement rules and thresholds, takes much longer than you would think. So the biggest thing is planning ahead, communicating what the project's going to be done, and then planning and building in contingencies for any overages that come along with it. So one of the things that we did when we were doing the reno project was we were having carpenters, painters, and then I think also florists, because there were some issues with the subfloor. But we moved all of the furniture out with movers, coordinated with staff, relocated them to the second floor, and sent all of the contracts to have liquidated damages, so that if one went over the end date, there'd be reparations to the town. We did, and obviously we did that because it's a time-sensitive issue. So, as many of you know, you want to paint before you put carpet down. So that was one of the things we lined up, and then we also built in a 10% contingency on that, which we ended up having to tap into, because with many old buildings, you run into issues. And so one of the things we had was an asbestos one, so we used some of the funds to mitigate that. So in that case, it was kind of the things you learned was the importance of preparing for contracting, and also communicating with staff, because letting them know ahead of time for the disruption that would come through. I think about it, even today when we're going through with Corona, how everyone's been kind of displaced, and we're starting to kind of all come back together now, hopefully for the long term. The other project, to kind of more of a larger scale one, has been our conversion for our AR software with Munis, and that's involved numerous spreadsheets, IDing staff who are involved to take on their portion of the project, consultant work for what they have to accomplish on their timeline, as well as test dates and training sessions. And this has been a project that's gone on for about a year, because there's so much data involved in conversion of that. So almost to Dylan's point earlier, it's the scalability of it. Whereas for the smaller projects, make sure you plan ahead. But for the bigger ones, make sure you get everyone involved and keep everyone informed. And then ultimately stay on your deadlines and budget. Otherwise, you're going to have way more problems.
Thank you. Dylan, we'll let you proceed with your second question now, please.
All right. I know that you're not a historian, but have you studied the effects of the 2008 downturn on municipalities and state revenues and aid? Have we learned the proper lesson from that recession? And how would you best approach the current economic downturn in this season?
Pretty much my life right now.
Right.
So we actually modeled basically all of our budget projections going forward as with '08 as a baseline. So the disruption that we saw to state aid and local receipts back then. So I mean, we obviously have a very strong commercial base, but that's taken a massive hit with what's going on right now. We're basically down 50% in this category. So the disruption we saw back in '08, and we were able to graph this out in terms of the budget impact, and like a lot of things, you see it that fiscal year after where it kind of really sets in, at least for from the government standpoint. One of the things that, and I think this is one of the things that with tight revenues, there's always a pressure to push the envelope in terms of, if we raise fees this year on liquor license, we can generate another $10,000, and we'll put all our eggs in that basket. And I think when you start looking at things in a silo like that, that's where you get tripped up. And I think as a whole, a big picture, I mean, from my point of view, having not an ultra conservative, but a conservative lag on revenues, as well as a certain percentage dedicated to stabilization funds so that you can bridge downturns without negative impacts to services, is the biggest thing. Now, there's always debate on how much you should set aside versus how much you should dedicate to current year odds. And there's some metrics on there that we've gone through, but right now, I can't remember in Concord what we did, but right now we basically set stabilization funds to essentially cover about a year and a half if we had a sustained shortfall of right now a 17% drop to state aid, as well as a 20 to about 25% drop in local receipts. So we're hoping that can bridge us until we're able to, hate saying this, but new normal, I guess, until things balance out. So I think the lesson is to kind of ratchet down expectations every year, find out where you can achieve cost savings, and then over time you can kind of build that, whether free cash or stabilization balances, so that when you run into a situation like we're in now, and like we generally will run into every 8 to 12 years, if you look back at the economic cycles, those help you manage those downturns without saying, we have to lay off 50 teachers, or we have to cut EMS services by 2 days a week or something. So those are things where the planning ahead, it's never popular at the time, but then afterwards, it's one of those things that people are really happy to have.
Thank you. Matt, you're ready for your second question.
Mr. O'Brien, how would you work on getting a stronger economic development relationship with our residents and business owners?
So I think part of that, we kind of touched on a little bit at the last interview in terms of some of the options that were out there. And from that conversation, I know we were talking about how there's a long-range plan upcoming that will need to be done. And I think part of that is really getting the local businesses as well as the residents and all stakeholders involved in sort of, projecting out where the next 5 to 10 years where we want to see ourselves. I think some opportunities are better than others in terms of viability and long-term sustainability, but ultimately it comes from the input from departments, boards and committees, local businesses, as well as residents. So one of the things that I worked on in Concord was working on the 10-year long-range master plan. And part of that is basically collecting ideas through various means, whether it's surveys, public hearings, sort of small focus groups where you could get the feedback from all the interested parties and come up with kind of a interesting plan. I think one of the best things about it, I want to say it's about a 200-page document, which I'll not to read for anybody, but the back of it has sort of a matrix that shows when each event is supposed to take place, sort of the funding implications, and what those goals are. And then at the end, you score it and you see how well you did. Now, some of the ideas are loftier than others, but there's always a practical way to grow without ruffling too many feathers. I think one of the things with Barre is expanding the tax base in a way that isn't going to rile up, your long-term residents and really disrupt the character of the community. And that's ultimately the goal, is to make it better, not intrusive. So it's an interesting challenge, one that I definitely look forward to.
Okay, I will ask my second question for you now. You may be aware we have a couple of marijuana grows that are approved in town, and the money from those grows that's allowed in the host agreement has to be used in specific manners, and not what my question is pertaining to. We're hoping someday to have retail marijuana sale, and the retail marijuana would generate funds that would go to the general revenue that we could use. It's possible to get upwards or excess of $300,000 in revenue if we could achieve a retail store in town. Could you please give me 3 examples of where those revenues could be utilized and what you would recommend doing with that sort of newfound revenue?
Yeah, I think, and this is one of those, I feel like you guys are at work with me right now because we're going over the same stuff in Natick right now. But one of the things, I've been trying to look up numbers on this as well. It's kind of hard to find, but you do see anywhere from like $200,000 to $1 million budgeted for some of these retail establishments with local excise taxes on them. I think the thing that needs to, I think it's anytime you have that influx, you're going to get cash grabbing by everybody who says, "Oh, I want this." But the biggest thing would be, it is a general fund revenue. So I'm opposed to dedicating it to one source over another because your needs could possibly change over time. However, if there's been service gaps in the town that have been identified that need to be funded, I think that's a great use. So if you were wanted to have hire another police officer or hire another DPW highway specialist, those are things where it makes bringing in the retail establishment more bearable to anyone who would oppose that, because it basically said, okay, your roads are better now, your streets are safer, because we were able to use these funds to hire someone. I guess from just a pure financial standpoint, I'm not a proponent of just saying this is a 1-for-1, because over time that's going to be part of the general fund, and I don't want to. I guess I'll leave it at that, because there are some pros and cons to doing that.
So you wouldn't have 3 recommended ways to utilize money other than increased services?
Well, I mean, I think you have to make sure that you're going to receive those revenues annually. So I think being able to track it and know that you're going to get those earmarks that you have budgeted. So I would say I'd probably go public safety, public works, and then dedicate some to stabilization. If you're going to force my hand on it.
Well, that was a goal, to look for methods of what people would do with the money.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I think
that's what I'm looking for.
and honestly, I'd want a bigger discussion with everyone on that too. Like, I wouldn't just say this is what you're doing out of the gate, but I mean,
No,
it's personal.
It's not a realistic question for now. It's a question to see if this kind of money fell in, what could we do with it? You know, some people could say, give it to the schools. Some could say, give everyone a raise. Someone could say, put it all in stabilization.
Yeah.
Give all the taxpayers a break, cut taxes. There's a lot of things you could do, and I'm seeing how many you came up with 3, at least that you came up with 3. Some people may not come up with 3. It's just people understand how that money can be used. And there's many different ways. You don't have to spend it. You can rebate it to people and lower their taxes with it.
Yeah.
Which, as Matt said in the meeting before, is something we never do in town. We don't get the opportunity. But you could spend some, save some. Just trying to fill you up. You can come up with 3 ways to use it.
Yeah, and actually that is a good point though, because we used to in Concord dedicate a portion of free cash to reducing the burden on the tax levy. So it really depends on the scale of it. So that's another
right. And just seeing if people can think what's going on. But we want to keep moving. We're getting low on time here, so I'll send it to Dylan now for his 3rd question.
Sure. In this time of recession and COVID-19, our friends and neighbors here and everywhere are economically hurting more than ever. Do you have any ideas to support the residents of Barre and for them to help deal with things like food insecurity, lack of affordable housing, and other aspects of rural poverty?
Yeah, I think that is a tough one. I'm not sure if I have a perfect solution for that, but
it's open-ended. It's open-ended.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, that's another, similar to Greg's question, there's a million answers you could provide for that. I know through like financial means, there's certain tax programs that you can implement. I mean, one of the things we're going through is a senior means tax exemption. There's a lot to it, but basically it shifts 1%. I think it's 1 to 3% of the levy to seniors who have been in their homes for 10 plus years that also qualify for state circuit breaker funds. So potentially introducing a program like that, depending on the demand for it, creating education about deferral programs, but also on the social services side, making sure that seniors and those in need can get the resources that are needed. Some of that time it's just creating awareness, whether it's making a posting on a website for community services, grant programs, local nonprofits that can help steer people in the right direction, because it is, I mean, it's a brutal time for people out there. So creating awareness and keeping that constant communication is so important, so that people in need can get the services and help that they really need.
Thank you.
Matt, your last question, please, sir.
Mr. O'Brien, please provide your understanding of the Mass General laws as it applies to open meeting, public hearings, annual town meetings, special town meetings, and associated posting requirements.
So in terms of, I'll try to run through this. So in terms of the overall laws for all of those, I'm very familiar with them. In terms of posting meetings and agendas and coordinating that at least 2 days in advance, so you can post the agendas in a public place as well as on the town website. In terms of town meeting, the warrant process, opening it. We have two annual town meetings as well as occasionally special town meetings. We actually have about, last year we had like 17 days of town meetings, so quite a bit. So pretty familiar with the process in terms of opening the warrants. Usually do that for about a month. Even though you do it on a monthly basis, everything comes in at the last day. Preparing motions for town meeting and ultimately following the parliamentary procedure that goes on in town meeting. So very, very familiar with the process, live it, so I'm trying to think the only other things. Public, did you say public records too?
Public hearings.
Oh, public hearings, okay. So that's, kind of a similar piece. So that's one of those, we usually have that with Board of Selectmen for like setting the tax rate, or during the Finance Committee, you have a public hearing for all of the budget, and actually we have for all the articles, but the ones that I mostly participate in are budget, or debt issuances, personnel board updates. But generally, public is able to participate on any issue, given the chair's discretion. And then after public comment, committees usually discuss the subject matter with administration or amongst the sponsor.
Okay. Yeah, I asked that mostly because we three members, and I do believe generally the previous select board members and probably future ones, we do rely heavily on our town administrator to know those regs and those rules so that we don't miss our dates, and we don't, we do our best to try to make sure we're aware of it so we don't slip also. But it's one of the things that we really just probably don't even realize how much we just rely on what you've got to do, and we assume you're doing it, so that by the time it comes up, we don't realize we have to push a date out and reschedule it because we skipped a step.
Yeah, I know, and it's really, it's a lot. It's a lot of work to be a selectman. So having you being able to coordinate that for everyone is just makes it a lot smoother. And it's one of those things that's, I think, I don't know, but we've had experience with the Zoom link on was wrong, and we had can't push back a meeting. So those are the type of things where the attention to detail and lining up the agenda ahead of time, having the materials in advance so no one's kind of blindsided by something that's on there. Just gives everyone a fair heads up and leads to a more efficient meeting too. So.
Thank you.
We've already pushed our 30 minutes, but I'm going to dip into our little excess time and ask you one last question. I'm trying to dig into the day of the office grind, the procedures, and real life here. What would you do if a town employee approached you with a complaint that their department head seemed to be under the influence on the job?
Yeah, obviously a real serious situation. I would, I think it's good for employees to be able to talk to the town administrator in that form and feel comfortable to express that, because it's a serious matter. So if that was the case, I would set up a meeting with the department head, have a talk with them, just have them run through, hey, what happened on this day and everything, like walk through it. And then if I found out there was a problem, I would try to guide them to getting them some help and having them try to, overcome whatever they were battling, basically get the help that's needed, because we're in the business of serving the public. It's not acceptable, but it's also something that if someone's dealing with something, they can get better. So it's a tough. Everything's a case by case on that, but that's how I would initially deal with it.
Thank you very much. Sean, it's time for us to say goodnight to you. We have one more to get through, and we're pushing our time. I don't think we make a decision tonight, but within the next week, I believe we probably will by our meeting next Monday, and we'll let everybody know that.
Well, thanks a lot for the time. I really been great to talk with everyone and get to know more about the town as well.
We appreciate you coming back.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Take care. Thank you.
Bobby, how we doing on our third? Is Jessica with us yet?
Hold on, I don't believe she is not with us yet. Oh, she just popped in. Are you ready for her?
We are, right at 7:40. She's timely.
Okay. She should see her.
She's coming.
There she is.
Seeing Jessica.
Hello, how are you guys?
Good. Thanks for joining us. I'll do our quick spiel here. As you know, we're broadcasting live on YouTube, and this will be recorded to be played later on a local access channel. You have the select board here as well as a few other observers. We'll have 9 questions for you this evening. We've all written up questions, and they vary per candidate because we were trying to, in some cases, ask specific questions to look towards someone's strengths or weaknesses we had concerns with. And we're going to begin with Dylan.
Hi, good evening, Jess. How are you?
I'm well, how are you?
Great. So, in case anyone watching is not aware, in addition to our interim town administrator, you are an elected town councilor in Palmer. Can you tell us about how you ended up in that position? What inspired you to seek that position? And how has that in any way influenced your work in Barre as the interim TA so far? Do you see any big differences of approach between the town of Palmer and the town of Barre?
Yes, thank you. I love this question. So when I was an intern for the town of Palmer, I was approached to think about running for town council because they saw how passionate I was about the town, and they saw how quickly I was understanding how the town operates and how municipal government operates in general. And so I was encouraged to run, but I was just about to leave for Washington, D.C. for the summer. I didn't know what my future really looked like because I didn't know if Washington, D.C. would be the right fit for me or not. So I said thank you, but we'll see in the future. And then the future came, and the individual who was in the seat that I ran for said that she was not going to run again. And in Palmer, as in many communities, there's really low participation. And so I knew that even though I was still balancing my undergrad and starting my grad program, I would be able to be successful. And I knew that I just enjoyed getting involved in the town, and being in that decision-making role would just have been incredible for me. And so I decided to run. Then the individual who was in the seat saw that I took out papers, so she also took papers out. So it became a contested race. But nevertheless, it really gave me the opportunity to connect with residents. I did a lot of door knocking, just the typical grassroots approach to running for local office. I had a lot of great mentors along the way as well, which was really helpful, but it really let me get to know everybody in the town and what everybody really wanted. So as far as how this role influences my work in Barre, I have also developed a really close relationship with our town manager this way. Our town manager is not the town manager that I interned for. So I have a really good relationship with him, and he's really been able to guide me as somebody who's, more senior. He has a lot more years of experience, so he's really been able to be very helpful with any questions that I have along the way. As far as similarities, Palmer is a city form of government, whereas Barre is a town form of government. So those are quite different. And that's something that I am still learning, is how to operate with a select board that is the executive body of the town, whereas in the town council, I am the legislative body of the town. So we make quite different decisions than you all do. So that's been a learning curve, but it's all been great along the way, because most communities in Massachusetts are still a town form of government. So most of my network knows how to work with the select board, so that's been really helpful.
Thank you.
Okay, Matt, we'll have your second question now.
First question? My first on it? Okay. Ms. Sizer, your education and familiarity with our regional representation supported the Board of Selectmen's decision to appoint you the interim town administrator. How do you make up for a lack of experience?
Thank you for that question. So I think that I guess it really depends on what you would consider a lack of experience, because my experience through my internships have been, I think traditionally a lot of people think that internships are kind of menial, you do kind of just administrative work, but I've really done some complex things in my internships, all the way from when I was in DC working on state policy for educators, advising governors on education policy. So I would say that my experience is very wide-ranging, and I'm also take my education very seriously outside of the classroom as well. So every day I'm reading. I'm subscribed to 5 or 6 different listservs that relate to local government. So I'm learning about what local governments are doing all across the country in different various situations, various size towns, but I am always reading about what issues other local governments are facing and then how they're addressing those issues. So I feel like my education is really deep, and then it's just about applying that education to the day-to-day work. And I found that so far, I feel very comfortable with that relationship between constantly learning about what other towns and cities are doing across the country, and then also applying to, what am I doing in Barre today? What's going on in my office? And I think that relationship has really meshed well together. And as I said before, I have a really great network, including, my town manager in Palmer, and then the chair of our town council is also a director of finance who has decades of experience and has been tapped for other town manager positions. So they've been really supportive with me, and they're always just a phone call away.
Thank you.
All right, that was fun while I listened. I had to get my cord plugged in, so I made it. My first question. Excuse me. My questions are more geared towards the actual operations day to day in the office.
So could you walk me through the process for both getting a small job done for the town, say something about a $3,000 value, and how you would proceed if you were looking for a larger project about $30,000 in value? How would you
Sure.
perceive the differences between the two?
Yeah, thanks. So anything under $10,000 doesn't require any procurement process. So under $10,000 is pretty a more simple project as far as going out to bid and getting quotes from other companies or organizations. So a $3,000 project would be pretty simple to go about. Depending on who I'm working with, that's really just going to determine the what route I take. So if I'm trying to work with the police chief or the fire chief on a $3,000 project, that's really going to be determined on their schedule and their needs versus something that would be exclusively for the town hall or for something else in the community. As far as a $30,000 project or something greater than $50,000 project, those are going to require different procurement processes. So between $10,000 and $50,000, you have to get 3 quotes. And I have learned the Combi system, which is the electronic system that the Commonwealth uses for procurement. It is a very difficult system, but I feel in the past couple of weeks I have been able to use it and get more acquainted with it, and I would look forward to becoming a CPPO to really master those skills. And then anything over $50,000, it would require an RFP or IFB, which is something that we did when we went for the fuel bid. And so those all require 3 different processes and could require, depending, again, if it's for the police or the fire or the DPW, it's going to require a different team for each project. And then I would just work with each team, get the necessary players at the table, and of course, you all play a really important role in approving different projects as well. So just making sure that I have good communication across the board and that we are being timely, because there's always timelines and deadlines and grants that could be of value to the town. So keeping all of that in mind, I would work together a process and execute it that way.
Thank you. Dylan, time for your second.
Okay, I know you're not a historian, but have you studied the effects of the 2008 downturn on municipalities, local receipts, state aid, etc.? Have we learned the proper lesson from that recession, and are we approaching the current recession appropriately?
So that's a great question. So after the 2008 recession, I think what happened largely was that a lot of state aid, and this is what I fear could potentially happen this year or in the future, although the reason for the recessions are extraordinarily different, where state aid and federal aid declined and the burden transitioned to the town. So when that happens, obviously the people across the board, the people that are paying the taxes, whether they're paying state, federal, or local taxes, they are being burdened even more. But at the local level, it's exacerbated even more because so much of the revenue in the town comes from local taxes. So I think that going into the upcoming year, when we're looking at revenues that we don't know of, I am scared that because those numbers really were never reconciled. The state and federal aid never came back to where they were before the 2008 recession. So I do have a fear that we will see this trend continue, but I have a good relationship with our state leaders, and over the past couple of weeks, I have been able to develop a good relationship with the state representative, who before I didn't know, and I know Representative or Congressman McGovern, and he has a really great seat in Congress right now. And so I have these relationships that I can work with them and advocate for the community and say that we need more federal and we need more state aid. And I think I have confidence in the leadership that we have for Barre, that they recognize those needs. and I would be willing to work with them in any way to help gain more state aid, more federal aid for the community.
Thank you, Jessica. Matt, would you like to ask your second question now, please?
Yes. Administering the town operations in requests or direction from the Board of Selectmen is a great burden. It includes long-term and short-term goals as well as coordination and scheduling of key activities throughout the year. Please explain how you would keep track of items that were discussed and raised months ago, but are now back to the forefront of our business or needs to be brought back to our attention.
Great. So I have this book right here that I keep. I take notes every single day, and I use a highlighter, and I call this my Bible. Like if I forgot it one day, and I was just I was a little distraught, but I was still able to get the business done for the day. But that book really helps me keep track of everything that you guys talk about, along with what I'm receiving from residents in the community, different projects that I need to attend to there. And then also when I talk to other, companies or organizations that have an interest in working, with Barre on a certain project, like, for example, recently I had a company reach out about doing fire extinguisher recertifications. So I really keep everything detailed in that book, and I reference that book every single day. So really I have at large, kind of a gathering of everything that you do, everything that's going on in my office, and I keep my notes organized enough where I can quickly recall, oh, hey, this happened on July 13th. All of my pages are dated. I just flip back and say, oh, this was highlighted that it's due August 3rd. So that's kind of that's how I've managed, the projects that I've been handed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. My second question for you is situational, not so much. We have marijuana grows in town, and we may have some revenues from that. We're very restricted on how we can use those revenues. We're hoping that someday we may get some retail sales. And if we get retail sales, this will hit the general fund. And I think it's safe to say that this could be up to or even excess of $300,000. I'd like you to give me three examples as to how we could handle those revenues, and then maybe what you would recommend we do with them.
Sure. So first of all, I think that, so there's the capital improvement plan that you have in place. So I would really go and look at what those big ticket items are that could be funded, and work out a plan on making sure that those get done. I would also, as we see in our free cash from town meeting, it took a pretty good hit. So if we were talking, if we got that $300,000 this year, I would definitely look at, trying to build up our free cash again. And we also don't know what our revenues are going to look like from the state yet. Hopefully pretty soon we'll have an idea. I've been in communication with the state senator, and it looks like there might be some good news coming down the line. But regardless, I would look at adding some of that to the free cash, and also really just kind of get a better idea. I know, for example, maybe a longer term plan would be a new fire station, or there's, some challenges at the public safety complex. There's some challenges within the Henry Woods building. So I would look at possibly doing some projects within those 3 buildings. Also the DPW building, there's probably some improvements that need to be made there. And I'll throw in a 4th one. I think that there's a really strong need for a compensation study to be done, to make sure that all of the employees in the town of Barre are being fairly compensated, because I think fair and competitive compensation is really important for the longevity of the employees.
Thank you very much. Dylan, your third and final question for Jessica.
Okay.
It's final.
In this time of recession and COVID-19, our neighbors and our friends are economically hurting more than ever. Do you have any ideas on how we can best support the residents of Barre, deal with things like food insecurity, interrupted access to income, lack of affordable housing options, and other aspects of rural poverty?
Thank you. So I believe the CARES Act, there's a lot of opportunity within the CARES Act to address a lot of those insecurities. I would have to look more into what the community is already doing to address, at least, as far as food insecurity goes. I think that one's a pretty low-hanging fruit because a lot of communities have food banks, or there might be a regional food bank, or maybe just another community that kind of partners with Barre on providing food to low-income families. For the longer term, I would definitely be interested in looking to see what the low-income housing look like. And I know that there's a lot of incentives at the state level to make sure that there is adequate low-income housing for residents. So as a town administrator supporting a select board, I would take every inquiry seriously from residents who are looking for these services. And a lot of times they can be referred to the state representative, the state senator, or even the congressman to get some more robust aid. A lot of times I have found in my experience that there's a little bit more of a robust program at the state and federal level for people who have those needs.
Thank you.
Thank you. Matt, your last question.
Trust but verify. What does that mean to you, and how would you approach this concept?
Trust but verify. That's a great one. So I just naturally have a lot of trust in people. I never I never try to, unless I know right away that somebody is trying to blow smoke, I try to trust whatever kind of comes to me, and then go and find a resource to either validate or invalidate their claim. So that's my approach, because I think that if you are standoffish to somebody right away, that can really damage a potential relationship. And I think especially in this world of public service, relationships are so important because, even within the town hall, we all have to rely on each other every single day to make sure that we're getting the public service done. And so I trust with caution, and I will always make sure that I'm going to verify a source, or even just asking them, okay, thanks for that idea, or thanks for telling me this. What do you have to support that? And so that would be my approach, is making sure that I'm maintaining a good relationship and respecting somebody's idea, but also coming in with some resources to validate it.
Thank you.
My final question for you this evening would be a little on the tougher side, and the reality of the job you're in right now. If a town employee approached you and they were very concerned that they felt their department head was under the influence on the job, how would you proceed with that?
Sure. So I would ask that employee to clarify or document to the best of their ability the behaviors that they're seeing, and obviously it's a very serious situation. I would call the police chief right away to make sure that he's aware of a potential situation that could be dangerous to other employees and the public. And then I would also make sure that I would be in contact with the board to let you know that there's a serious situation going on. And then once we can either confirm or deny that this employee is under influence, and that's when, disciplinary steps would be taken. And I really think it would depend on what they were under the influence of. I believe I would like to approach the situation as, we don't always know what's going on in people's lives. Being there for only a month, I have a lot of confidence in the employees in the town hall. I think they're wonderful people, but, people make mistakes. Some of them are very serious, and I wouldn't want to be as strong as saying I would terminate them right away, but there would definitely need to be some disciplinary actions taken. But I would absolutely have the consultation of the board, the police chief, and also potentially our legal counsel.
Thank you very much. Jessica, it was nice having you back again this evening.
Thank you.
I don't know exactly how we are on time, but we're right about where we should be. We did well. We'll be making our decision probably within the week. We don't plan to make a decision tonight. I'm hoping to do it by Monday night's meeting, and we'll make sure we let everyone know then what we decide.
Thank you.
I appreciate you coming back. I appreciate your answers, and I will tell you I liked your answers. Gentlemen, any closing comments?
No, I guess I just want to double check. No, I have no closing comments for Jessica. This would be more of a board discussion at that point.
Okay. Dylan?
Yeah, no comments. Just thank you for your time this evening, Jessica. It's nice talking with you as always.
Thank you.
Okay, we'd ask you to depart from this a minute. We'll have a brief chat before we close, and we'll be in touch with you by Monday anyways for our meeting.
Yeah. Have a good night, guys.
Thank you.
As I'll say right out of the box, I come away with not at all the recommendation I plan to coming into this, and it's very clear to me right now. I don't know how you guys feel, but my questions, I felt she answered all of my questions very well. She followed my requests, like for what to do with the money. She gave me 3 different options. The other guys, unfortunately, Evan gave me no options to do with the money. He wanted to speculate whether or not we get it. When I talked about bids, I'm looking for procurement and what we have to do. I'm looking for procedure. And both the other guys said, well, we got to come up with a plan and do this. And no one really talked about what she did. Under $10,000, you don't need to go out to bid. You can pick someone to do it. Over 10,000 up to 50. And then she went beyond that with the steps. And those are the procedures that I expected she would get, and I expected that Sean would get. And he mentioned procurement procedure, but didn't get into it at all. He went the other way, and that Evan didn't get it. And that was my concern with his lack of education, that he wouldn't have those specific procedures down. And that was the goal of asking that. The goal of my first question, that first question, the goal of the second question, talking about possible revenues, was to try to see if people understand where our revenues come from. My thought always was, if we get marijuana money in, we get a substantial amount. I would like to be able to tax break people with some of it. But Jessica's the first one that really talked about capital purchases, savings, different options to do with the money. Everybody else kind of talked around it and didn't really come up with I just wanted 3 approaches. You can save it, you can spend it, or you can refund it. Those are the 3 approaches, to summarize. She's the only one that got that. Again, I'm very impressed with her answers tonight. And as far as the personnel issue, Evan went right to, we'll follow the procedure, talk to town council, and fire the person. And, we have processes that we have to follow for our procedure and our discipline. And something being drunk or under the influence of job, we could terminate, but I would like to think that anybody that has any sort of an issue like that has an opportunity, depending on what it is, to maybe seek help or seek a program as disciplinary action. Once again, I liked her answers the best on that, and her answers to what you guys asked. So, Matt, I'll ask you next for your comments.
Yeah, I believe that when it comes to kind of the personnel issue, the question you had, I think Sean and Jessica were kind of similar. They both said that they weren't coming in right away with it should be terminate. They both said that you got to do your job right, but there's also a point where you can kind of hopefully the right situations. They both seem to imply that each situation would be a little subjective. So you would have to evaluate the situation, so it isn't an all or nothing response, which I appreciated.
The only difference there, I think, is Sean seemed to talk about, we'd look into it and see what happened and investigate it after the fact. Where she was the point was someone came in saying the department is intoxicated or whatever. She was going to proceed now and get right into it. He was going to follow it up the next day. That's what it sounded like, and I didn't like that. But sorry, go ahead.
No, and I got you on that. And I do think that, in general, some of the responses from Sean or Evan, specific to not just my question, but I think Dylan had a couple questions that were kind of like comparing how you do business in your larger cities or towns now. I understood their answers to a degree. You kind of have a system, you just apply the system to a smaller scale. I get that, like project management, you have steps in every project management, whatever project you're dealing with, whether it's construction or master plan or whatever. But I do think there are some subtleties that make a difference. When you're in a smaller town, from my impression, you can't just blanket take what you do in a larger community and apply it to a smaller, because you don't have the time with the limited personnel. It's not that your support staff are able or not, and it's not that the town administrator is able or not. It's that they don't have enough time to do it all. So when you try to take maybe a larger community's approach to something and then apply it to a smaller community, and I think there was a little response from Sean O'Brien where he referenced, efficiencies. That's the thing. When you're in a small community, you got to be very efficient and try not to create too much extra effort just to get the job done. You've got to know where that applies, and it may not apply to a smaller community sometimes where it does in a larger community. Similar to how you were asking your questions about how do you deal with different, like a $300, a $3,000, a $30,000, a $3 million project. Well, the smaller projects, you're not looking for all the same type of level of overhead and documents and paperwork to verify that it was spent appropriately. A lot of our stuff would, in my mind, you'd have to pay attention to that, because I agree that we can do things to try to, make sure we're accountable. I mean, that's ultimately what all that paperwork in larger municipalities is about, is if someone makes a mistake or does something poorly, someone can audit it and say, you blew all this money, or you didn't dot the I and cross the T and we lost our grant funding. But there's also a certain level where I recognize some of maybe it was Sean mentioned CDBG grant funds, and Evan might have even mentioned it for some of the low-income housing or upgrades. I've worked with CDBG stuff with Worcester. The paperwork required to verify you did what you actually said you were going to do is a lot. And so our town usually would rely on CMRPC to help us a lot with that, so it's not all on the town administrator. But I think even for our town, CMRPC doesn't really want to dive into that, because of all of that paperwork for the true value we might get out of it is not nearly the amount we would like to. So that's where I didn't hear that from those guys, like, how really is it different? And sometimes I felt like their answer was more to try to say it wasn't different than to identify the differences.
that was the impression I got as well. They were pretty much saying, it's all the same, just a little smaller.
Yeah, that's
A little
what
small, a little easier.
that's what I intended with that question was, I wouldn't think that a town that's 10 times the size, just has 10 times the budget, and if you can multiply or divide by 10, you'll just get, a smaller or larger version of the same thing. I don't believe that that's the case for all the reasons you both laid out. So I just wanted to hear them expand upon that a little bit. And my question about the negative social ramifications of the recession, COVID-19. I know that the town of Barre isn't able to, fully address, the needs of all of our residents, and no town is. But I just wanted to see some out of the box thinking about, the culture of the town government in supporting the residents. Not just in grant funding. But just in a community, a sense of community togetherness, and figuring out problems a little bit out of the box, and of course the relationships with our congressional representative and our state senator and rep, I think are going to be pretty crucial to solving some of these challenges. So I was happy with Jessica's answer on that.
I think we had a good set of questions overall tonight. I think we all, and this is the idea of, like I liked when Matt suggested this, we're all going to look at and target certain things. And I was trying to highlight between what an education has done versus what experience has done. I find Evan and even Sean very charismatic. And that's been my concern with Jessica, is the ability to lead and to not be taken advantage of by department heads. That is always my concern with her, because she's very young. Some of them would be like, oh, she's like my little daughter or something, be patronizing. And I certainly hope that's not the case. And I don't think our department heads would knowingly treat her that way. But I think they might feel that towards her. And that was my concern. But her answer on that very serious, which would be a very serious discipline issue, which I don't think we'll ever have that issue with any of our department heads, but she had the right response for it, which I didn't know if she'd know what to do or she'd have the right answer. And I was very impressed that she did. As far as the other guys, Sean's hard to gauge because he has the education, but he's been in finance. And, that's why I wanted to ask about the money for the 3,000 threshold. We know under $3,000, we can go get a couple quotes and just use who we want. And, we still want to spend it wisely, but knowing the process, the legal process, is important to make sure it's done right. And I'm not convinced at all that Evan understands the legal process at our level of that office, and the duties are going to fall on him for that. So I was a little disappointed I didn't get the answer I wanted, but that was to test his knowledge. I was surprised Sean didn't give a better answer, quite frankly. I thought he would have. But I think we all pick questions to target certain aspects of our concerns or whatnot. And I'm very happy with our answers tonight, and I don't think we're going to have an overly difficult decision, I don't think. My ranking has certainly changed for these three candidates. I don't know if you guys have thought about that way as well, if you want to talk Monday again and rank them, or time to process further discussion, talk to people in public about their impressions first. What's your favorite, guys?
Yeah, one last thought is, and I know that, our just currently our statements were maybe more favorable to one of the three people we interviewed this evening.
Mine intentionally so.
And understood. And I'm only making this statement because despite some of the answers that might have been maybe not very clear or vague,
off the mark,
maybe from Sean or Evan, there's part of me that I could still see that I understand the knowledge is there. And I think their approaches would be different. But I did try, at least on my questions, I tried to keep up with your questions, and I realized I was killing myself if I wanted to keep all that notes. But on my questions, I did pay attention, and I tried to kind of rank each question with a 1 through 10. And ultimately, I ended up with, they all got the same total. So I still see them individually kind of bringing certain strengths that I definitely think our town could use. But I did feel like that no matter who we ended up choosing, we're going to get a good town administrator. That's one thing I got out of tonight's interviews is we really didn't make a bad choice.
We've been unbelievably fortunate. We get down to our final 3 every time we pick someone. I don't think we can do bad with any of the 3. I really don't. And that's very sincere and honest. We're just very fortunate, and the 3 we have for finalists. I don't think the town is going to wind up dissatisfied with any of these 3 candidates. But I have, guys, I never have a problem, expressing my opinion why. This isn't personal. It's not nothing to gain for me or anybody else, just for the whole town. I was very concerned coming into this for her age and her inexperience, but I really liked her answers across the board tonight. I really did. I agree. Good candidates.
I agree. And I think both her and Evan, one thing I do notice is that they, generally I found that I appreciated how they answered the questions, but they're also, it doesn't seem like it takes them long to think it through, if you know what I mean. They kind of know their answer. They're coming, this is my answer. I did feel a little bit stronger with the, I don't know if it's the right word, but quality of the answers that Jessica gave. Kind of like you said, I don't know if that's a benefit of being an interim town administrator, so she's a little more familiar with our town specific things. So maybe, I'm not guessing that's the case. I'm just saying, I did hear some of the things like kind of you were saying, Greg, that's what I was looking to hear with some of the questions I asked. And that was the type of answer I was hoping to get.
We really didn't allude to these ahead of time, so I don't think anyone could have prepared and guessed what we were going to bring up tonight. So I think they're genuine.
Yeah.
But yeah, but quick isn't bad. If you've already got that one in the chamber and you're ready to fire it off, that's a good thing.
Yeah, and that's not to knock Sean. I think Sean's just very thoughtful. He wants to and that's to me also a positive. You want to make sure you say what you think is the right thing to say. So that's also a strong positive. It was just a different approach.
And I found, like I said, I find our candidates all very charismatic and very knowledgeable, and they are opinionated, which I expect from an administrator. I expect them to have an opinion, and I expect them to have and Jessica showed a little more of that tonight. A little more self-confidence in her answers and her responses, which I didn't get from her even in the last interview, which gave me that concern that she might be like the concern we have with Andrew, too timid, but she showed a different side of it tonight. Dylan, go ahead. You haven't had a minute, please.
Yeah, all 3. I don't think we could do bad to point either of any of those 3. So this will be a tough decision. I would definitely want to go back and re-listen to some of these answers, because I don't think that being able to come up with a fully thought out answer to a vague, intentionally or unintentionally vague question from one of us off the bat is necessarily the ultimate skill an administrator needs. A thoughtful approach and having more information is definitely a benefit as well, not just rhetorical skill, but being able to actually investigate and come up with a true and comprehensive answer, I think is just as important, if not more important, than being able to be put on the spot in front of a panel. So I want to give them all a fair shake again. On my own time, I'm going to watch this again and take notes on all of them. And I was impressed by all three of them. They're three very distinct people, distinct approaches, and I wish we could hire all three, to be completely honest.
Well, if we get that 300,000 marijuana money, baby, we can.
I mean, can they turn that into another 300,000 somehow?
Wouldn't that be nice? All right, so why don't we, take our time. We'll discuss this a little bit Monday and see if we want to reach a decision. I'm sure I know I will have some phone calls. I'm sure we'll all get some phone calls and take a minute and talk to people that may take the time to listen to it. Get their impressions as well. And, I have not called any references. And this is for me from being in business myself for years. I can give anyone 3 references. They're going to sing the praises of me. So I see references as, if someone can't list 3, that's weird. But I don't put a lot of stake in references just because if you're not putting someone down that's going to sing your praises, you're doing it wrong. Doesn't mean you guys might not want to call them. I put my stake in what I see and hear. Always have. It's never done me wrong. But I will listen to other people. I will get their opinions. See if anyone changes my mind about anything. But I will certainly be prepared Monday to rank them. My first, second, third choice.
Yes, I agree. And maybe we want to follow up and ensure that on the agenda towards the end of it, we set up an executive session. So if we do decide, we can start our internal negotiation discussions.
And I didn't cruise through that agenda yet, but I see Sandy's with us. So Sandy, please make sure if it's not that we do have discussion on the agenda and probable selection of a town administrator. I'll assume she heard me.
Yeah, I'm writing it down.
Thank you. Do you have anything else, Sandy, while we're online here before we get off this meeting?
No?
No. Gentlemen, anything else quickly tonight?
No, I'd just like to say thank you to everybody that also jumped on the Zoom video to listen in. It just reminds me of how much those that did. I see Claire's been in a lot of these. So thank you for the time you're putting into that, Claire, as well.
Yeah, we all appreciate that.
I want to encourage anyone who's paying attention to this process to drop any of us an email or give any of us a call and chime in. I'm very interested in what folks who have a great amount of interest in the health and longevity of our town to make their to add their 2 cents to the decision-making process as well. So I've gotten a little bit of feedback so far. I love that, and I want to encourage more input if anyone wants to chime in.
Agreed.
With that, I'll look for the appropriate motion, gentlemen.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I will second the motion to adjourn.
A motion, a second for German. All those in favor?
Matt Urban, yes.
Dylan Clark, yes.
Greg O'Sullivan, yes. Good night, everyone, and thank you. Thank you, Bob.
All right, see ya.
Thanks,
Bob.
Chief.